The Healing Spring Show, healing families and communities by breaking the stigma of addiction and expanding the scope of recovery. Now here's your host, John Edmondson.
So we're here today with author, lawyer, and advocate for recovery, Bryan Cuban, and he's going to talk about how recovery is more than just not using drugs and alcohol. Bryan, welcome to the show.
Hey, good to have you. Yeah, good to have me.
Good to have you here.
It's good to have me. Maybe not.
Maybe not. So this already started off.
You decide.
They'll figure it out together. So to start off camera, you got really excited about everything and said, let's just go ahead and dive in and start talking. Beginning right from where we're at today, what is Bryan Cuban's life like today?
Bryan Cuban's life today is, as a public speaker, I'm a non-practicing lawyer. I do still have my license. People still ask me that. I'm a licensed attorney. I haven't been disbarred or suspended. All that happens a lot with lawyers struggling with addiction. I'm a 2-time author working on my 3rd book. I just finished my peer recovery certification training. And so I am doing the things that I am passionate about. That is talking about recovery, empowering recovery, and challenging norms on recovery.
Challenging norms is what you're all about.
That's not what I'm all about, but it's part of what I do as an advocate, because recovery should never be standing still. And that means every aspect of treatment, every aspect of mutual aid is up for inspection and critique.
Okay.
Because we should always be moving forward.
So let's dive into critiquing. Where do we think we should go first? What are some of the things that you've heard people say, which you might recommend we change a little bit?
Well, in a perfect world, there are lots of things I change about 12-step. I've got sober in 12-step. I credit 12-step, and for those who don't know, Alcoholics Anonymous is the most well-known of the 12 steps. But in a perfect world, there are lots of things I would want to change. Oh my God, he wants to change. Just what I want to do. It has nothing to do with everyone else's recovery.
Sure.
We're talking in a perfect world of change. I would change things about residential treatment, make it less 12-step oriented, more multiple pathway oriented. So there are a number of different ways to look at things. I'm very big into harm reduction. I carry Narcan with me in my car in my computer bag. Everyone should have Narcan.
Narcan, so what is that?
Naloxone reduces opioid overdoses.
Gotcha, okay.
Save a life. Save a life. You never know.
Wow, it's powerful. So you have that with you every day, everywhere you go?
Yes, in my computer bag and in my glove compartment.
Yeah, and also you talked about AA. It sounds like you actually have an interesting relationship with them. I think it's a beautiful program. And at the same time, maybe there's some things that could be done differently. Is that your...
Well, my relationship with someone in recovery is the same as anyone else's relationship with AA. See, I just broke the 11 tradition. I go to meetings. I did my 90 and 90. I went in there struggling, and the fellowship, for lack of a better term, fellowship, the people there supported me, and that's what I needed. Because my first 90 days, my first 6 months, the pull to go back to my old lifestyle of blow and drinking was strong. It was strong, and I didn't feel like I had anyone I could really rely on, even though I have a very close family, and they are now my support system. I don't go to nearly as many AA meetings as I used to. But it was important to me, and it's still important to me. I just don't necessarily embrace all the different aspects and traditions and just the things that come with 75 years of doing something the same way over and over again. I believe we should always be advancing, we should always be reflecting, we should always be critiquing, because that's how more people find recovery.
Yeah, it's how they find the truth, how they connect, how do we do things
So
differently?
from that standpoint, I'm just like anyone else. Just a person who had a drinking and cocaine problem, went in there, wasn't judged. My sponsor, still my sponsor, and it's good. And my sponsor's great, because his discussion with me is, how are you doing? You do you. If you doing you isn't working, we'll talk.
Oh, that's a different way of looking at it.
Yeah, and that's not how he did it. He did it, quote unquote, by the book. But he is very cool in terms of how he views people he talks to in recovery.
But what you're saying is it is working. How long do you have?
About 12 and a half years now.
Okay. So 12 and a half years, connecting a little bit with that program, connecting with a sponsor, doing kind of your own system. And I hear a lot of people say this, that you can't do that. You got to do it this way, or it's just not going to work at all, or you're in...
I don't tell anyone what their path should be. All I can tell you is how I do it. If someone tells me they're interested in 12-step, and people come to me all the time, I'm not trying to put my framework on them. If they want the abstinence pathway, that is part of my toolbox, whether they want to go to AA or not. And part of that toolbox is not telling them how I did it. Part of that toolbox is getting a sponsor and figuring it out with their sponsor.
Right. So if they need to do it that way, perfect. But everybody's a little bit different.
Well, everyone has to figure it out for themselves. Recovery means so many different things to so many different people. What recovery means to you is not what recovery means to me.
Yeah, and you talk about recovery in your book, and I hope everyone goes and reads it. I'm super impressed with that.
Thank you.
Yeah, when I first started at Healing Springs with Rachel Graham and Melissa Engel, they wanted me to start reading the books in the library, and this is one of the ones in the library. And at first, to be honest, I was resistant. I looked at it and it said addicted lawyer. I was thinking in my mind this was like a Wolf on Wall Street kind of story. It's going to be glorified, all that stuff. And then I got into it, and I'm like, this is real stuff.
It has some good stories in there.
There were
I mean,
few.
how many people you know that have traded Dallas Mavericks championship tickets for cocaine and then flushed it down the toilet?
Right, or how you hit it or where you put it.
Yeah. So there are some funny stories in there. And I think when we talk about our journeys, at least for me as an advocate and public speaker, I just can't reel out all this pain. And you have to put it into a story form and find some humor. You mix in the bad parts with some humor and wrap it all around that, because otherwise everyone at the end is like, oh,
It's too much.
Where's the drink?
Right, but then you share things in there, especially for men, that most men don't even talk about. Can you tell us a little bit more about it?
I'm in recovery from bulimia. We don't hear men talk about that too much. I binged and purged for over 2 decades. I'm also in recovery from exercise bulimia, which is obsessive compulsive exercise for the primary purpose of offsetting calories. And I've also struggled with body dysmorphic disorder. And what body dysmorphic disorder is basically when someone takes a perceived small or even non-existent defect in their body, they imagine it, and in the reflection they just see it exaggerated to the point where all they see is this quote-unquote monster. And it can be very serious. It affects about 2 to 3% of the population, men and women equally. It correlates with eating disorders. It is not an eating disorder. It gets confused with that a lot. It correlates with suicide, with substance use disorder, depression, and it's very difficult to treat.
So how did you work through it?
I have been seeing a psychiatrist for 15 years. I also take medication, a antidepressant, because I've struggled with major depression and suicidal thoughts on and off during my life. So I take a antidepressant that is also something that helps with obsessive compulsive disorder, which is body dysmorphic disorder is on that spectrum.
Right. So, I'm thinking about our clients, and I meet with them a lot of times. Some of the men, they have the same issues you're talking about. And almost every time we start the conversation, they say, they use different words, but they say, I feel weak, or I feel like I'm a wimp, or a weenie for talking about it, for crying, for having these issues. What would you tell them if they were listening?
What I don't tell them is, don't feel that way.
Yeah.
There's no reason to feel that way. There's no reason to be ashamed. I just cringe when I see that, because that's invalidating how they feel. Of course there's a reason, because you feel that way. Right?
It's coming from somewhere.
It's coming from somewhere. So I'm not a therapist, so I try to be very careful.
Sure.
But what I do is I share part of my journey and what the feelings I felt and how for me, it resonated back to a little boy, a teenager, in the trauma of fat shaming and bullying. I was bullied severely. And I just tell my story and see if that stirs in them, and see if they make connections. And then if they make connections, that's when you say, okay, you're the therapist I know. But I'm very careful not to be a therapist. I'm a storyteller based on lived experience.
Sure, but the stories you're telling are helpful to other people, make them feel like they're not alone.
Yes, and that's good. And if you connect on pain, they may connect in painful memories, and I'm not going to try to bring out those memories. But that's still a process where maybe the next thought is, okay, maybe I need to talk to someone.
Yeah, I remember you changed it. I remember you mentioned that multiple times in your book. It's like, if this is going on for you, you need to be seeking help. You need to get that change.
And I kind of regret that because you, I hate to use you.
Yeah.
I would much rather focus on what I did. You is for the self-determination, right?
Right.
The inside you. But for me, all those things were important.
And I agree. It's been a powerful idea just to even hear that men are starting to come out and talk about these issues
Sure.
and be more real about
And
it.
it's a very stigmatized issue, even nowadays, for men. Where we are now in 2019. When I first began binging and purging, it was 1979. We weren't talking about it for anyone, let alone males.
Men, yeah.
And then the singer Karen Carpenter passed away in 1983 from complications related to anorexia. And that kind of brought the eating disorder discussion into the pre-digital national spotlight, but also kind of stereotyped it as a woman's disorder. So even today, it is very stereotyped, even though about 25% of all those with eating disorders are male.
25%?
Yes. But only about 1 in 10 will seek treatment.
That would make sense because they're still trying to hold on, they're still trying to hide it.
But I get the emails.
So what do they say when they reach out
I
to you?
feel alone. I don't know what to do. You talked about bullying. I was bullied. I have a difficult relationship at home. I was fat shamed. It's usually somebody who connected with something I've written about or spoken about.
Yeah, and it's all the things that men don't want to talk about, the bullying part. Can you share a little, if they haven't read your book yet, and I hope they all do, what was the bullying that you went through?
I was a heavy kid, bordering on obese, and I was actually physically assaulted revolving around my weight. My brother Mark had given me a pair of shiny gold disco pants, and they were tight on me, but I wore them because I love my brother and he gave them to me. And the kids made fun of them, and walking home from school one day, they just decided that I was too quote-unquote fat to wear those pants, and they physically assaulted me and tore those pants to shreds off me down in my Fruit of the Loom tighty whities and threw them out in the street. It was so traumatic that I could go to that spot in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and show you where it happened.
Yeah,
So,
it's still locked in the brain.
Yes, trauma stays. Trauma stays. We hopefully find healthy ways to deal with it, but that doesn't mean we forget it.
It's so true. Trauma stays. When I work with some clients, I see that all the time. And even some ones who have gone through bullying or they used to be heavier. And it amazes me because I see some of your pictures and you look really well built.
Well, that's when I was abusing, for the lack of a better term, steroids. I was also addicted to steroids, which is also not uncommon with body dysmorphic disorder.
Oh, so you need taking more in just to look more and more different. Nothing's ever good enough.
Nothing's ever good enough. If I can't get thin enough to be loved and accepted, because every time I look in the mirror, I still see this fat monster, I'll get more muscular. But every time I look in the mirror, I still see this fat monster.
Still see the same one.
Yes.
And I work with a lot of men. They have the almost exact same kind of story.
Sure.
They're well built. They're very handsome men. They look great, and they have these two different things going on. One is they still feel like they're not good enough, and the other is if they were bullied, even though they could be 3 times my size, but because they were bullied at 8 or 7 or 15, they still have that fear in their eyes.
Absolutely, and you know the difference. We have to be careful about cause and correlation.
Right.
Right. So, not everyone who goes through bullying is going to have these things happen to them.
Definitely.
So, but there are strong correlations with some of these things.
And you're kind of saying that basically your story was to look into that, and ideally a lot of other men should do the same.
I think
Be good.
part of recovery means exploring the story. I think for anyone, right?
Yeah.
It's one of the things I preach all the time when, especially within the legal profession, where we are just hate to show vulnerability and explore that. When we see someone who's struggling with cocaine, we see something they do, see someone who's a problem drinker, we see moments. We don't see the story.
Moments.
That's all we see are moments. We don't know. We may not know the story. Someone close may know the story. They may not even know the whole story, right? A wife may not even know the whole story. A sibling may not even know the whole story. So we just see the moments, and we're trying to interpret somebody, and we're trying to figure out what to say based on moments. But there is a story, and that story can involve so many different things. It can involve so many different kinds of abuse. It can involve so many different destructive thoughts through the course of a life. We just don't know.
Yeah, so all we see is that external, but we're not seeing the internal, what's
That's
going
right.
on.
So from my standpoint, the non-therapist standpoint, I consider it incredibly important to know the story and treat the story.
Treat the story. Yeah, and so when you say recovery, that's what I wanted to dive into, because when you say recovery, I think it's very different from what many people say as far
Absolutely.
as recovery.
And for me, recovery's treating the story. If you look at the SAMHSA definition of recovery, and much to the shame of people who taught it to me, I'm not going to be able to repeat it by memory, but it's there to go to SAMHSA. It says nothing about abstinence. It says nothing about sober. It says nothing about rock bottom. The SAMHSA definition of recovery is all about all the different areas where people can lead their best life and what that means to the person. Recovery is whatever a person wants it to be. As I told you before, I blow people's mind, especially the hardcore 12-steppers, when I talk about harm reduction. Now, a lot of them get it. A lot of people get it. Not everyone's like this, but especially in social media. One of the examples I used was if you're doing 3.5 ounces of cocaine a week, and we call that an 8-ball, and you decide that you will function better and be able to go to work and do all the things you want to do by only doing 1 gram of cocaine a week. Guess what, people? That is recovery. That is you reducing the harm to try to lead your best life as you define it. That's not abstinence. That's not about rock bottom. That's not about sober. And sober is really an abstinence term, right?
Yeah.
So if you're in harm reduction, what use is sober? I don't see it. Use the term. I still use it. Shame on me. I'm conditioned. I'm conditioned, just like rock bottom we talked about. I think I'm not going to no longer refer to my recovery tip. I refer to it as my recovery tipping point. I'm no longer going to use rock bottom because I think rock bottom has become a culturalized way of predetermining that we have to have the worst possible result happen to us before we can begin a true recovery, and that is just not true.
Yeah, you're saying that it can be way up here, maybe here. Some people it will be that rock bottom.
Some people it will be. I mean, whatever the point you decide to begin that journey is the point. Why do we have to call it rock bottom? It's just the point, right?
It's the point, the tipping point.
It's just the tipping point. And you could tip and then take a step backwards, a step forwards. Rock bottom also implies, in my opinion, that recovery is linear. It's not.
I was hoping you would talk about that because you mentioned this off camera earlier. It was the difference in some people's perspectives, and you're really good. You're honoring it where they're at. That's how they want to work their program. But then your opinion is different, and it's that it's not about the length of time or if you slip and come out. Can you talk more about that? That was
sure. I mean, recovery is a cross-country road trip, right? Sometimes you get a flat tire, but you keep going on the road trip.
Yeah.
I use the example of running a marathon. I've run 8 marathons. I've fallen. When I fell at mile 12, I got up and kept running. That didn't undo miles from 1 through 12, right? And so when we talk about rock bottom, I think within that definition is also the notion that if we reoccur, quote-unquote relapse,
right.
It undoes everything we've been.
Yeah,
we've
everything's
done.
gone now.
Everything's
You're starting
gone.
over.
And that's shaming. And people feel enough shame. I don't think we have to add rhetorical shame to it.
Yeah.
We don't have to pile on with words. People do that all on their own.
They're already feeling it.
They're already feeling it.
Yeah, they talk about the walk of shame to pick up the chip after you've gone back out, what that feels like.
Oh,
So
the
you're
walk
saying,
of shame. The walk of shame on my first day picking up my chip.
Yeah.
it was brutal, but I did it.
Yeah, we did it, but
My 24-hour chip.
you're saying shame be gone, basically. I mean,
No, I'm not saying shame be gone because shame is a bodily function. For the lack of a better term, when we progress through the ages, evolution has given us shame. Evolution has given us shame. So I'm not going to say shame be gone to someone because that is invalidating a normal bodily biological response.
Yeah, it's an experience that we might need.
What I encourage is for people in a safe therapeutic setting to evaluate what are the triggers for that shame and why they feel that way, and how to deal with those triggers and figure out what the core of it is. Not to say I shouldn't feel ashamed, because of course you feel ashamed. You had a reoccurrence, of course you feel ashamed. Who wouldn't?
Yeah, it's like stress. Like there's healthy stress and unhealthy
Yeah,
stress.
of course you're stressed. Of course this. That I don't believe in I try to do my best not to invalidate somebody else's feelings. I'd rather talk about why they feel that way.
Get to the core of it.
Get
what's
to the
actually
core.
going
That's
on.
right. What's driving it? What's driving it?
So it sounds like when you're talking that you're advocating for recovery, and part of that is therapy.
Absolutely. Oh, I'm in therapy. I'm still in therapy. I love therapy. I think everyone should be in therapy.
I was about to say, do you think everyone should be in therapy?
I think everyone should get some therapy. It's therapy has been very important to me in dealing with that hurt, shy, bully little boy. Because before Bryan can repair himself, he has to repair that little boy and let that little boy know he was loved and that it was okay and that it wasn't his fault. And it is not just as easy as sitting here telling you. It took, and it's still ongoing therapy.
Yeah, so there's not a, like you said, it's not a stopping point. This is a journey, healing that little boy inside.
Yes, recovery is a journey, and it's a different journey for everyone. If your journey's abstinence, 12-step, yay, do it.
Do it.
If your journey is harm reduction for heroin, yes, do it. Because you want to, if you need to take Suboxone, yes, do it. If you're smoking weed and you're good with that while you're abstinent from alcohol, yes, do it. It's not for me to tell you what your recovery is. You tell you what your recovery is. And you figure out whether it's working for you, not me.
Yeah, and you're saying as long as you're doing something, as long as you're going the right direction. You had a post about sitting on your head for 3 hours.
If you can stand on your head 3 hours and that is what's keeping you abstinent and that is what is keeping you balanced, for a pun, in your recovery, stand on your head. I don't care. Is that evidence-based science? No. But recovery is about forward progress with, however we define that, over the long term, right? And figuring out how to be happy and figuring out how to be happy in all these different areas. It's not just about the drugs. It's not just about the alcohol.
It's about the whole thing.
It's about the person. It's about the whole person. And the SAMHSA definition, I recommend everyone look at it. You may not agree with it. It may seem counterintuitive to what you learn, but just look. I'm always learning, and I don't discount anything. I look at everything. I read everything I can about recovery, about harm reduction, about Suboxone. I carry Noxolone, which the Narcan is the brand name we hear about, in case I ever am needed for when someone overdoses on heroin. So I try to learn and expand my mind as much as I can, because I'm not just someone in recovery, I'm an advocate. Everyone's not an advocate, right? But most people are just trying to work the recovery.
Yeah, they're trying to. And I love the Paula Garland. She was on here before, and she's a UNT professor and works with Healing Springs to help us build our program. When she talked about the same thing, the SAMHSA definition, and I looked it up, I was like, this is cool. Like, actually, for anyone in the world to want to do that, it makes sense. You're in the state of recovery, healing. How did you say it? The best self. You're
trying to live your best self. Yeah. That's right. How can, for me, if someone's coming to me and they want, quote unquote, advice, I want to hear where they are. I want to hear how they define recovery. I want to hear about their priorities. I want to hear about their goals. Because it is not my place to tell someone how to live their best life and define their sobriety.
Yeah, you're helping them find it for themselves.
That's right. And if they're living their true self is abstinence, and they want to go that pathway, there are ways to do that too. And 12-step is one of them.
It's a good option.
It's a good option. We don't even have to debate statistics or rates or anything like that. Here's how I view 12-step in a nutshell. For me, forget the arguments, forget the success rates. Mutual aid was such an important part of recovery for me, and I'm sure there is actually data on this. I personally believe mutual aid, which is like-minded people together. Forget the name we put on it. Mutual aid is an important part of the recovery continuum. People to support you. Maybe that mutual aid isn't 12-step. Maybe it's your family unit. Maybe it's you have friends. But connection is so important from my perspective. So for me, 12-step was never about, and this will upset people, but this is the way it was never about the steps. It was never about the big book. It was about connection.
Connecting to another human being.
It was about connecting to people who understood.
So Bryan, this is a fun conversation to have because we're talking about recovery, two grown men talking about our little boys inside getting hurt and connecting to them, connecting to other human beings, things that men wouldn't talk about before.
And they still don't talk about today.
Still not, we're still maybe not in the norm yet. But
especially
we're
not lawyers.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's a different, what is the climate like for that, for lawyers? You talk to them?
We are a profession in crisis. The most recent statistics, just a couple years old, found that 21% of all licensed attorneys would be considered problem drinkers or quote-unquote alcoholics, another term that I don't like because it's not a clinical diagnosis.
Right.
It's a label that we give ourselves. Compare that to, what is it, about 12% for the U.S. population? Problem drinkers? Whoa.
Yeah,
twice.
Yeah.
And if you talk about millennial lawyers, that age group, over 1 in 3. We are a profession.
1 in 3.
1 in 3. We are a profession in crisis. That study shook a lot of people up. It was the American Bar Association Betty Ford Hazelton study. It shook up the profession, and we have seen a lot of change just in the last 2 years. I speak at a lot of law firms and do a lot of bar events and stuff like that. It's a very important issue in the legal profession right now. Why? Why are lawyers so susceptible? There are a lot of theories on that. There are quite a few. Inherently, one of the reasons I believe is that we are a group of people who are socialized and educationalized, starting in law school, that to allow ourselves to be vulnerable, to show vulnerability in any way is weakness. We are taught to take advantage of vulnerability, not show it. So then it becomes very difficult to
to get the
look
help.
inward of yourself. And there are other reasons, but that's one of the reasons I see. We are a lot of type A personalities who are very driven, and we are people who don't like to explore our story because you have to be vulnerable to do that.
You have to do that. And you were saying that before, to really heal, recovery is about exploring our story.
For me, yes.
Yeah.
And I believe, I don't know what data there is on that, so I always try to speak about data, but I honestly don't know. But I personally believe it's important.
I totally agree with you. As a therapist, we look at the whole story.
Yeah.
There was a friend of mine, Katrina Hart, who I mentioned a lot. She has it up on her wall. And basically it talks about exploring the whole story.
That's right.
And until you know someone's story, once you know someone's story, you can help but love them.
Yes.
Which is what you were talking about before.
And we can move it into the clinical spectrum. The correlation between addiction and trauma is strong.
Right there.
It's strong.
Yeah.
So you can talk about story. You can talk about what's assumed within story is trauma, can be trauma.
Yeah.
So we can move it to that realm too.
Most definitely. And when we talk about story, so we're talking about healing their child, we're talking about therapy, other different things. Can we talk about God?
Sure. I believe that if that is what part of your path, that's great. That's part of your path. I consider myself a humanist. I'm Jewish, but I wasn't raised religious. I've never embraced it. I consider myself a humanist, on the agnostic level. Because of that, I never embraced we agnostics in the big book. And I just basically decided early on that I am going to tune that out and focus on the connection.
On the human connection.
Yes, on the human connection, because otherwise you'd start getting all worked up about what other people say. And I see it in group, and people are people, right?
Yeah.
And it's struggling people trying to find recovery, so that's going to happen. But for my recovery to keep moving forward, and I was fortunate to realize that I needed not to get wrapped up in what other people are saying and embrace how I view recovery, even if I couldn't put a definition on it like I can today. And so I just decided not to worry about that. People will grab on to what they need to define their own pathway, and I support that. I support if believing in whatever God you believe in, if that is what is moving you forward, believe in it. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So recovery is becoming more and more interesting because you'll have some people on this show and they talk about Jesus, or they talk about God, or eventually home get
Great.
someone to come and talk about Buddha.
Great.
But what you're saying is that's not necessarily a requirement
No.
to recover. So there's a group of people out there that would have more hope than maybe otherwise hearing that.
I don't even think spirituality is a requirement to recover. I think every person's different. I think every person is different. When we start saying you need this or you need that, you're speaking for millions of people that you don't know for Adam. Unless we are talking about evidence-driven data. Right? There is no evidence-driven data that I'm aware of, and someone can email me, correct me if I'm wrong, that you need to be spiritual to recover, that you need to believe in a God to recover. Now, we may hear that within the rooms or whatever recovery group we're in, but that doesn't make it evidence-based.
Right, those are people sharing their experience, strength, and hope.
Absolutely.
And for them, it was true.
Absolutely, those are people sharing their lived experiences, and that's what works. And somebody may grab onto that, and that's what works for them. That's wonderful. I have no problem with that. I don't tell people what their path should be. I just try to step back from the biases I have obtained, and I'm not always successful. I have my recovery biases.
Sure.
And look at how outcome rates can be improved. How can we make it more inclusive? And I think that's a good thing. Even if there are those who are stuck in their way and they find that threatening, that's okay. I think it's a good thing to always be looking at ways to change the paradigm of how we look at recovery and how we recover. Because that is only inclusive, it's not exclusive.
Right, you're challenging everything with the purpose of challenging it is really what else is out there we're not even thinking of? How
That's
we
right.
get more people help?
We would still, if we did not do those things, we wouldn't have Noxolone, we wouldn't have Suboxone, right, to help people dealing with heroin and opiates. How can we stand still? How can we stand still? People are dying of overdoses of heroin, opiates every day. How can we stand still? How can we say, no, this is the way? No, I don't know. We should always be expanding the way.
Always growing because of the statistics for recovery. A lot of people are out there struggling. And the message a lot of times is towards the person. Like, only a few people are going to make it. You better be one of the people that makes it. Maybe part of the message is, too, if I'm hearing it right, is maybe we need to keep looking at how we're doing it.
The message is every life has the same value. Keep them alive. Keep them, stay alive. The only prerequisite to recovery is being above the tombstone. That's it. However you get there, just stay alive. Even if that means that you're using Suboxone and continuing to use heroin, even if that means you're going to clean needle sites and you have supervised injection sites, even if all that, just stay alive because you can't recover if you're dead.
Unless, yeah. So you're saying bare minimum, at least keep going. Don't
at least
give
keep
up.
going.
Don't
Figure out how you can keep going. Harm reduction. If using clean needles keeps you going at a supervised injection site, do that. People should read up about what supervised injection sites really are. They are not just places where junkies and criminals go. They are supervised, and there are people that are talking about recovery. Those lives are worth just as much as anyone else's life. And when we start talking about junkies and no, you're just enabling, no, we're talking about staying alive until the time, hopefully, when you find recovery as you define it.
Yeah, so you're not saying that's the end goal. You're saying do that until you can get farther along.
It's not my place to tell anyone what their end goal is.
Yeah.
I just want people to keep going, to stay above ground and figure it out. Can't figure it out if you're dead.
Yeah. For you, when you first started, the beginning of your recovery, what was the experience? I'm thinking of the person who's watching this. It's their first week, or they're thinking about it, and they're going through some challenges. I'm guessing it wasn't easy.
It wasn't easy. My psychiatrist gave me two options after my recovery tipping point, April 8, 2007, which my wife found me zonked out in bed, a 2-day drug and alcohol-induced blackout. And we had gone to Green Oaks, and the next day, my psychiatrist talked about 12-step and residential treatment, and it was kind of a funny conversation looking back at us. I was telling him I was too busy for residential treatment. I had no cases left. My legal career was dead.
Not going well.
Yeah, I talked about 12-step, which was right next door, the group. And, they smoke there. I can't smoke. Secondhand smoke is dangerous, right?
It could kill you,
They
right?
kill you.
Yeah.
Come on.
Forget about it.
Come on. Always a reason not to recover.
Sure.
But I did, but I went into 12 and it was brutal. It was sitting in that room the first day. I hadn't showered in 2 days. I was bawling in the corner. And I smelled, and I wasn't even thinking about whether I was an alcoholic. What I was thinking about is I had to do something or I was going to lose my family. Because not lose their love, but family's distance, right? I wanted to wake up just one morning where I looked in the mirror and I loved what I saw without the aid of cocaine or alcohol. Cocaine to prop me up, and it had stopped propping me up a long time before. Or alcohol to deaden the self-loathing. If sitting in that room would give me just one morning of that, I would do it. And I'm sitting in the room comparing stories. I'm listening. Mine's worse than his.
Right.
Oh, that's bad. Oh, man. Yeah, you got a problem. But not me. I don't have a problem. And so eventually, as the hour went on, I came to grips to some degree with the fact that I couldn't do it alone. Whatever it was, and people say, well, you found your higher power. Okay, I don't care how people want to define it for me. I needed that group. I didn't think about it in terms of higher power. I still don't. It's the group, my friends.
It's the connection.
It's the connection.
Yeah.
And I needed that, or I wasn't going to make it. That's what kept me going back.
It was, if I don't do this, I'm not going
done.
to get through it.
If it was all this, I'm done. There won't be a third trip back to Green Oaks because I'll be dead.
Yeah, so even you went to a program that's not perfect, being there in the room.
No program's perfect. Look at residential recovery rates. I mean, there's no perfect method of treatment, right?
Yeah.
So this is why we should always be open-minded. So there's no perfect method. 12 steps not perfect. Residential treatment's not perfect, but they are what they are right now in time.
Yeah.
And at that moment in time, I needed those people, and I still love those people. I go and see them. I don't necessarily need the connection anymore on the mutual aid level.
Right.
I love the connection on the friendship level. I don't necessarily need the group to help me not use cocaine or drink.
Use, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, it shifted a little bit. In that timeline for feeling better, did you notice anything within that first 90 days or within the year?
I'm
or was
trying
it
to
a
think.
struggle?
Well, my girlfriend, she's now my wife. We dated for over a decade while I found recovery and rebuilt a broken trust. So relationships they won't always, but they can survive it. So we're going on 3 years married now.
Congratulations.
Thank you. So it was hard. She moved out, and I was thinking she was going to go, right? And that was killing me. I felt totally alone, and my brothers were supportive, but they've never gone through this. It's hard. They're learning too. So the first, and I moved in with my dad for a while. I was very lucky, very close with my dad. He lived across the street. So in addition to my 12-step group, I had my father's support there. And it was hard. There was a strong pull back to the lifestyle. Where's Bryan? Where's Bryan? I could page my cocaine dealer right now. The bar downtown, that's tonight. The bar uptown, that's tonight. That was hard. Rewiring and retraining my brain to not react to those triggers was difficult, which is why the connections were so important. I'm sure I did more than 90 and 90 because I needed to be around people all the time.
Yeah. So it was hard, but somehow you did it.
Yes, I mean, it wasn't somehow. There was a reason, and because I did it, right? I did this, I did this, I did this. I don't look back at it as somehow. I look back at it, this is what I did. It may not be what you did. It may not be what she did, but it's what I did. And it worked.
And it worked.
And it's worked today. And I see no reason why it won't work tomorrow or the next day.
Sure. And so what is it like so again, I'm thinking that the newcomers out there, they're just starting off, and they're like, is there hope out there for me?
There absolutely is hope. Recovery is possible. I have seen, and I'm sure you have too, some really difficult situations where they're going great today. I've seen difficult situations where I've lost friends. I lost a very good friend to alcohol. I've lost friends to prison. I have people I did drugs with are still doing time, and some are out and doing well. I've lost friends who have died by suicide. And so the path is painful, but one of the greatest gifts of my recovery is to face that painful path on its own terms and feel my feelings. Mm-hmm. My father died 12 months ago, and we were so close. We were so close. He lived across the street from me. And I'm not talking metaphorically across the street. I'm talking
you could walk
across
over
the
there.
street.
Okay.
And so he died, and it would have been so easy to mute those feelings with a, right?
Yeah.
Or a drink, and nobody who would know. I couldn't. My wife would probably know.
Fair.
The guilt. I just wouldn't do it. That's just not who I am today. I'm a different person in recovery, even than I was 6 months ago, or a year ago, or 2 years ago. But I felt it, and I bawled, and I cried, and I still cry, and I felt it. There was a time in my life where that would have been impossible.
There's a time in your life where you wouldn't have felt any of that, or you would have run from
Or I would have reoccurred.
Yeah.
Or I might have attempted to take my own life, as I came close to doing in 2005.
Yeah, but today it's different.
Today I still get depressed. I still struggle with major depression. Today I live my life as a human being. I won't say normal human being. That's insulting to people, because we all live our lives how we are.
Yeah.
But I get depressed. I have my problems. We all have problems, and I also understand that I have my problems with a suit of privilege on me. And I make sure everyone understands that I understand my privilege. I understand that I have a billionaire famous brother who made sure that I was supported in my recovery, that I have never had to face a lot of the issues, socioeconomic issues that other people have had to face in recovery. I've always had health insurance. Mm-hmm. So yes, all of my problems and what I deal with in my recovery occurs within that framework. But that is what it is.
It is what it is, and it's something to appreciate and be grateful for. I honor that.
I think it's important as advocates to realize that so much of what goes on within recovery and within the space doesn't have anywhere near that type of privilege, and we need to be sensitive to that. Mm-hmm. And I'm always doing what I can with the tools I have to be a part of changing that paradigm.
Yeah, but as you talk about, two things come to mind. But one is, you talk about the privilege, and you had almost everything you wanted, but that didn't make you happy.
Absolutely not. Money might, if you're happy, money, someone I love dearly put it this way. If you're happy, money might make you happier, but if you're unhappy, it won't make you happy.
It doesn't help.
It is not going to change you from unhappy to happy as a person, as who you are. It might change you situationally, give you an endorphin happy high.
Sure.
Just bought that new boat, right?
That'd be nice.
But it may give you that situational endorphin high, but that's different than being happy.
Different than feeling good about yourself.
That's right.
Good in your own skin.
I know a lot of people with money who do not love themselves.
Yeah. Yeah, and it can go both directions.
Addiction does not discriminate. Depression does not discriminate. Depression doesn't know a dollar bill unless it's about the privilege of being able to get treatment, right? These things, they don't know that. So I always try to stay aware of that too. I get all the time, especially from the anonymous people on social media. Not the anonymous people, the movie, the anonymous people on social media. What do you have to be depressed about? Your privilege, what's your problem? And you're right, I am privileged. I do have that. Mm-hmm. But I'm still sad. I still struggled. What do you want me to say about that, right? This is what it was.
You're still human.
I'm still human.
Yeah, we see that in treatment all the time. I remember having one gentleman on one end of the couch, and he didn't have anything in life, and he was so frustrated because he was never given the things that he really needed or wanted. And he said, if I just was given that, I wouldn't be in this place. Mm-hmm. And then there was another young man on the same couch who said, you know what, I was never taught personal responsibility. I was never told what I need to do. I was always given everything I want, and I'm totally miserable. And it was interesting because there were the two sides that we talk about privilege, but they're on the same darn couch. They're still going through the same thing.
Absolutely. Feelings are feelings, right?
Yeah. It's part of
shame is shame. People have different ways of getting there, but it's still shame.
Yeah.
It may affect different people in different ways, but it's still shame.
It's still a shame. It's still part of who we are.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what is your message to the people who are just starting then?
Just starting recovery?
Yeah.
Figure out what's important to you in your recovery. Write the top 3 things down that are important and start the journey. If abstinence is important, how are you going to get there? Write it down. How are you going to get there? If you don't know, seek help from somebody to talk to you about how you're going to get there. Mm-hmm. If moderation's your pathway, you're dealing with a heroin issue, and figure that out too. What tools do you need to begin that pathway? Maybe it's not hooking up with somebody who can only preach abstinence, right? Mm-hmm. And so because that may end up shaming you and going nowhere. So it's figuring out what the correct tools are to begin the journey. And if you don't know what the correct tools are, there are plenty of people who can help you figure that out. There are therapists, there are recovery coaches. It's out there for you. I've dealt with people, especially lawyers, who don't want to talk to anyone. They're afraid. I had one lawyer she's a trial lawyer, and she said, I'm not going to AA because I'm afraid somebody from AA from the group will be on my jury. So I referred her to In the Rooms, the online community, mm-hmm. where you can create an anonymous, and you have online video meetings, online meetings for just about any pathway you want. If you were just that, if there was just no other, to me that's the last alternative, resort, yeah. The last resort. But there's that. There's always a path.
There's always a way to get there.
There's always a way to get there. It's just the hard part is how do we step back mm-hmm. and have that moment of self-awareness to then step forward. That's the hardest part, right?
I think so.
The hardest part isn't being up in the plane. The hardest part is stepping out of a perfectly good airplane with the backpack on.
And taking the first leap.
Yeah,
so you had mentioned a little bit about families. What would you say to them? Your wife kind of walked in on you. Your family was really worried about you. What would be the advice?
The cliche advice, obviously, and it's true, is you can't make someone recover. They have to want it. I know families who have gone bankrupt, sending their kids to every residential treatment program in the country. So what I tell families is empower the path the best you can. If you don't know how to do that, talk to people who do. It is not easy to figure out. I'm always suggesting for families who say, what do I do? Talk to someone who's been there. Talk to a therapist who specializes in talking to parents of children dealing with addiction. Because there has to be a point where you just have to take care of you, right? You have to take care of you. If you can't, you have to recover mm-hmm. because, and that may not be substances or alcohol, but you're in a trauma. You're recovering. You've experienced trauma. Someone you love is struggling. That is trauma. How are you going to recover from your trauma to take care of you? Because you certainly can't empower this if you're not empowering your recovery.
You have to take care of you. That's a message that doesn't get heard a lot. It's
take care
be
of
there
you.
For them.
It's hard. We want to be there for our kids, and I encourage anyone to the extent they can to, to try to figure out what that means. You have to figure out what that means.
Sure.
I don't tell anyone what that should mean. Supporting their children in recovery, it's going to mean something different for everyone. But the universal that I don't have to be a therapist to tell anyone is take care of you. Because watching a child suffer is trauma. It is real.
It's real. Yeah. Many of them don't think about it. It's a great message.
Because you're comparing what you're going through to that. You're feeling guilty. This is my fault. Mm-hmm. Right? So it's tough to fight through all of that to take care of you.
Right.
Because, and I've heard this, I don't deserve to take care of me. This is my punishment, not taking care of me. And I've heard that.
You're talking about the parents?
Parents, yes.
saying
This
that?
my punishment is not taking care of me. This is my penance for what I did to my son.
For the mistakes I made,
For the
which led
mistakes
to
I've
this.
made, yes.
Wow. And you're saying the opposite, though. Let's not do that.
I'm saying recognize that. Let's do our
Be
best to
aware of it,
recognize
yeah.
that for what it is, and hopefully you can step back long enough to decide to get some help for that and have somebody who can explore those issues with you in a safe therapeutic setting.
Yeah, and every time you go back to that baseline of feel it, be aware of it, notice it. When you talked about shame, well, if you're feeling shame, feel it. You're feeling that sadness, feel it, and then get some help about it.
Yeah, and I try to be careful about that too, because of course they're going to feel it.
Yeah.
Of course they're going to feel it. I just don't tell them to disregard it. I don't tell anyone
Yeah.
you shouldn't feel that way. It's not your fault.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't consider anything like that helpful, me personally.
Sure.
Other people may. I don't consider it that helpful to anybody.
Yeah, and it's funny that we have a joke sometimes in therapy, like you're going to feel better for sure. You're going to feel your pain better. You're going to feel your sadness better. You're going to feel your loneliness better.
Yeah.
Until you're able to work through it a little bit.
And I'm always working. I was on and I'll be really vulnerable here. I was on the bike in our house yesterday working out, and I was listening to some music. And I was listening to, it was a Simon and Garfunkel song. And it made me connect with something from my past. And I just started crying and crying and crying. And I stopped pedaling, and I was, whoa, where did this come from?
Right, what was
well, I
that?
have something to talk about with my psychiatrist next week. I did. I just started bawling uncontrollably listening to that song, a song that I've heard 1,000 times before. I think it was Mrs. Robinson, or Sound of Silence, I think it was.
Yeah.
And I've heard it 1,000 times before. I never cried. And and all of a sudden I just started, and it wasn't because the song connected me to a memory of my past, a feeling of my past. And I just started bawling. It was weird. But I'm human.
Yeah, it was just part of the day.
It was part of the day. It's okay to cry.
It's okay to cry.
It's
It's
okay to cry. Now, I have to be self-aware. Is that crying connected to a descent into major depression?
Mm-hmm.
Am I crying all the time? Am I getting out of bed? So I now have the tools, 12 and a half years in recovery, to analyze and think about what that meant for me. But someone early on may not. So having the support and getting help to do it is a good thing.
It's a good start, and that was right where I was thinking about is the people who they're in recovery, they're moving forward, life is looking better. Realistic expectations. What is it really going to look like when you're there? I think some people feel like they're doing something wrong if they're crying at 10 years sober, or they're having issues at 10 years sober or 12 years sober. You're
Sure.
saying, well, I mean, it just happened.
I'm sorry. I mean, yes, it didn't just happen because it was connected to a memory.
Right.
It was connected to a memory, and I got entrenched in the memory, and I think that had a lot to do with
You
it.
made that connection.
Yeah, and I within a short period of time started dwelling on the memory instead of interpreting the memory, and so that's rarely helpful either. But I have all the tools where the next day I can talk about it and think about it.
Yeah, and even use to help other people feel
That's
not
right.
so alone.
So crying's okay. I cry. I can cry at a movie trailer, just a note of music. That's just who I am. And part of recovery was putting aside who I was trying to be, and accepting that guy that cries at music for movie trailers.
Part of recovery is accepting who I am instead of who I was trying to be.
Yeah.
And just being the guy that cries at the movies,
Yeah.
or just being who you really are.
Because I associated who I was with bullying and shame and never being loved, never going on dates, never getting to kiss a girl. So I didn't want to be that person, even though that person was a nice kid.
Yeah.
And so I had to be someone else. Enter cocaine, bathroom in downtown Dallas, Texas, because that allowed me to be the Mac Daddy Bryan that all the girls loved and get all the adulation and artificial attention that I could associate with acceptance and love instead of just being me.
Yeah, and today you're saying you're just working towards being you. This is Bryan as is.
Yeah, Bryan as is, cries riding on the bike. Bryan's as is shy unless I'm talking about what I'm passionate about, which is recovery. I'm not shy in that area. But you put me in I don't go to nightclubs anymore, but if you theoretically put me in a bar, I'd head for the corner because I'm just not comfortable in that. And I was never comfortable in that. That was never who I was. The only way I could make that who I was with as much cocaine and alcohol as I could get.
And so for the men out there, it could be whatever you're not comfortable with. I mean, again, it depends on what we're talking about, but maybe you just don't have to be in some cases. You don't have to be the cool guy at the bar or anybody else, just be you.
Well, I would take it a step backwards and say, think about why you feel you don't have to be, I'll accept that you feel that way. Think about why. Think about how you got to that point.
Take a look
and
at
what's
it.
driving it.
Yeah. Yeah, and then at the end of the day, if you want to move forward and change that, great, and if you don't,
Then you don't.
That's
You meet
your
people
journey.
where they are. You
Yeah.
meet people where they are. I don't try to bring them to where I am.
yeah. So, Bryan, how can people find you and get more information about what you're doing?
I'm very active in social media. If you're on Twitter, I'm at bcuban, BCUBAN. I'm easy to find on Facebook. My page is open. I'm on LinkedIn. My email is bryan@bryancuban.com. That's Bryan with an I. And my website is www.bryancuban.com.
All right. Well, I hope you look him up. I hope you read his books. And the new one coming out is called?
The new one is a novel. And it is
Novel.
brutal. It is like learning to walk again. Because I know my own story. That's easy. Making up stories is difficult. It is called The Ambulance Chaser.
The Ambulance Chaser. All right. Well, I'm looking forward to it coming out.
Thank you.
Bryan, thanks for being
Thanks
on
for
the
having
show.
me.